Hello and welcome back to the Matthew Rocky Show for this week of March 21st. Thanks for tuning in for part 2 of the episode this week. Just a lot of content to cover. We're going to get right back into the stories now. Well, the black box containing the flight recorder was recovered Wednesday from the wreckage of a China Eastern passenger plane that crashed earlier this week, officials say. The flight recorder from the China Eastern flight MU-5735, a Boeing 737-800, was found. A spokesman for the China's Aviation Authority told reporters. State media outlets later claimed that the recorder was badly damaged. Boeing 737-800 planes are equipped with 2 flight recorders, and officials say they are still trying to find the other. At present, it is unclear whether it is the data recorder or the cockpit voice recorder, said the Civil Aviation Administrator during a news conference, according to the AFP news agency. Previously, officials said that all 132 people on board the plane were killed in the crash, and no survivors were found during an initial search of the plane's wreckage. Arkansas authorities say they've arrested a 22-year-old man in a shooting at a car show that killed 1 person and left 26 wounded. Arkansas State Police said Wednesday that it had arrested a Florida man, and he's been charged with battery and aggravated assault. Police say the suspect was taken into custody after being released from a Dumas hospital Wednesday morning. He's being held at the Dumas City Jail. The shooting occurred at a Saturday night car show and a community event in Dumas. Police said Sunday after the shooting, it was the result of a gunfight between 2 people. Police in Arizona say 5 people, including 3 children, were shot Wednesday afternoon at a shopping mall. The shooting was reported in the Tanger Outlets in Glendale, Arizona. The gunshots rang out around 2:45 p.m. Glendale police officer Tiffany Naglula said a man was with a woman and a small child when he got into a fight with a group of young people, and it escalated into a shootout. All 3 were taken to the hospital. Nagula says none of them had life-threatening injuries. 2 kids in the other group had been shot and were also taken to the hospital. Their conditions were not released. Police say no suspects are on the loose. Over to Oklahoma, where 6 teenage girls on a high school lunch break were killed when their small car with only 4 seats collided with a large truck hauling rocks, the Oklahoma Highway Patrol said Wednesday. The crash occurred shortly after noon on Tuesday in Tishomingo, a rural city of about 3,000 people, located about 100 miles southeast of Oklahoma City. Those killed included a 16-year-old who was the driver, 3 15-year-olds, and 2 17-year-olds. While what led to the crash is unknown, it highlighted concerns of teenagers carrying other young passengers. William Van Tassel with AAA's national office said, quote, just adding a single passenger under age 21 increases the risk of crashing by 44% when the driver is a teen. The crash report, released Wednesday morning, said the circumstances of the wreck remain under investigation, but Highway Patrol Trooper Shelby Humphrey said Tuesday night that the girl's car was making a right turn when it collided with the truck. Turning to Indiana, a number of notes to report there. First of all, from the governor's desk, actually all 3 stories coming from the governor's office. First off, Governor Eric Holcomb on March 21st signed into law a measure that will allow the state's citizens to carry a handgun without a permit, also referred to as the Constitutional Carry Bill by some in reference to the Second Amendment. The measure, HEA 1296, was passed by a 30-20 vote in the Indiana Senate on March 8th after it was approved by the House in a 68-30 vote on January 11th, both largely along party lines. This comes just a week after Ohio adopted a similar measure. Indiana Governor Eric Holcomb has also signed legislation that requires all counties using certain voting machines to leave a paper trail before the 2024 presidential election. The new state law, HEA 1116, requires Indiana counties that use electronic voting machines to install, quote, voter verifiable paper audit trails, unquote. a backup system that allows people to check their votes on a paper printout before confirming their votes before the 2024 election. It also, quote, provides that after July 1st, 2022, a county must meet certain requirements when using any direct record electronic voting system that does not include a voter verifiable paper audit trail for an election, unquote, according to the legislation. Holcomb signed the measure on March 15th, while Indiana Secretary of State Holly Sullivan later praised the move. Holcomb also vetoed a bill this week that would bar transgender athletes from competing in girls' sports across the state. In a veto letter on Monday, Holcomb said that he feels the legislation falls short of providing clarity and a consistent state policy for what he called, quote, fairness in K-12 sports, unquote, in Indiana. Holcomb wrote, the presumption of the policy laid out in HEA 1041 is that there is an existing problem in K-12 sports in Indiana that requires further state government intervention, unquote. Holcomb signaled support for the bill last month, but said, quote, it implies that the goals of consistency and fairness in competitive female sports are not currently being met. After thorough review, I find no evidence to support either claim, even if I supported the overall goal, unquote. He said the bill leaves too many unanswered questions. And a day later, Utah Governor Spencer Cox vetoed a bill that would ban transgender students from participating in girls' sports in his state. In response, Utah Senate President Stuart Adams and House Speaker Brad Wilson said they have the two-thirds majority needed to override the veto and indicated they would hold a override session on March 25th. In anticipation of the veto override, Cox subsequently called for a special legislative session on the same day to consider the financial and legal issues regarding the measure, to allow lawmakers to amend the ban and potentially include taxpayer funding for school districts and youth sports organizations that anticipate being sued. Twitter has locked a satire website's account on the social media platform because it posted an article describing a Biden administrative health official as its, quote, man of the year, unquote. According to a notice sent to the Babylon Bee, which holds 1.3 million followers, the post violated Twitter's rules against, quote, hateful conduct, unquote. The rules mean that, quote, you may not promote violence against, threaten, or harass other people on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, religious affiliation, age, disability, or serious disease, unquote, according to Twitter. The post that prompted the action directed people to an article stating that the Bee's, quote, man of the year, unquote, is Dr. Rachel Levine, the Assistant Secretary for Health at the Department of Health and Human Services. Levine was born as a male under the name Richard Levine. Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida is criticizing the NCAA after transgender swimmer Leah Thomas won the Division I National Championship in the 500-yard women's freestyle. WWSB reports DeSantis issued a proclamation Tuesday declaring Sarasota native Emma Weyant, who placed second, as the winner. Weyant competes for the University of Virginia and previously won an Olympic silver medal at the Tokyo 2020 Olympics in the 400-meter individual medley. Thomas, who attends the University of Pennsylvania, made history as the first transgender athlete to win in an NCAA Division I championship, beating Weyant by 1.75 seconds. DeSantis wrote, quote, by allowing men to compete in women's sports, the NCAA is destroying opportunities for women, making a mockery of its championships, and perpetuating a fraud. In Florida, we reject these lies and recognize Sarasota's Emma Weyant as the best women's swimmer in the 500-yard freestyle. Weyant has not commented publicly on DeSantis' proclamation. Thomas's victory has increased the debate about whether transgender men should compete in female athletics. He has followed NCAA and Ivy League rules since he began his transition in 2019. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis also this week signed into law a bill that makes it a requirement for graduation for high school students in Florida to complete a course on financial literacy. Under Senate Bill 1054, which gained unanimous approval in Florida's state legislature, All public school students entering ninth grade in the 2023 to 2024 school year and thereafter will have to complete a half-credit course covering topics such as balancing a checkbook, managing bank accounts, applying for loans, filing federal and local taxes, and disputing a billing error. The new law makes Florida the 22nd state in the nation to require financial literacy instruction as a prerequisite for high school graduation and a standard high school diploma. It also makes Florida one of 7 states that require students to take a standalone finance course before they graduate. Reports alleging online child sexual exploitation have increased by over 35% from 2020 to 2021, according to the U.S. National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The private nonprofit established by the U.S. Congress in 1984 and funded in part by the Department of Justice said that its cyber tip line received 29.3 million reports of suspected child sexual exploitation, an increase of 35.9% from 2020, and also the most ever the NCMEC has received in a single year. Over 99% of the reports were those that alleged suspected child sexual abuse material, legally referred to as child pornography. In 2020, the organization received 21 million plus reports of suspected child pornography, while in 2021, it received 29 million plus reports, an increase of the 35.3%. Well, doctors are getting word that strokes are not something that just affect older adults. Strokes in young people are increasing, with adults as young as their 20s being at risk, according to healthcare professionals. Norton Healthcare in Kentucky reports younger people are currently having risk factors for strokes that were previously associated with the older population, such as obesity, high cholesterol, hypertension, diabetes, and sleep apnea. Women on birth control who smoke and experience migraines are also at high risk. Dr. Brian Eckerly, a stroke neurologist from the Norton Neuroscience Institute, said if you think you or someone you know is having a stroke, get help immediately and call 911 and go to the hospital in an ambulance. Eckerly said, quote, "One of the real tragic ironies of a stroke is that it's not usually painful. People with heart attacks have chest pain and difficulty breathing and get medical attention. Strokes are often painless, sometimes get ignored, written off, or people think it will pass on its own," unquote. Moving into part two of the Matthew Rocky Show for this week of March 21st. Thanks for tuning in for the podcast. I always appreciate your support. And if you have not told others about the Matthew Rocky Show, I would encourage you to do so if you have enjoyed it. We can be heard on pretty much anywhere you get your podcasts: Google, Apple, Spotify. We're also on YouTube and Pocket Casts. And then, of course, you can learn more about us at thematthewrockyshow.com or on social media. Well, I've got a few stories to cover for you, but before we get to those, my boss said he'd fire me if I made any more country puns. I guess you could say that was the end of my career. All right, all right, moving into those last couple of stories. This one coming out of Maine. No culture canceled here for sure. It's a tiny library on an island off the Maine coast, and it's promoting itself as a haven for banned books. The tiny library is on Mantinicus Island, which is about 22 miles off the coast, and it's dedicated to collecting and loaning out books that have been banned because of their content or themes. Among the titles on the shelf are To Kill a Mockingbird, The Grapes of Wrath, and I want to bet Dr. Seuss too, but doesn't mention that in the article, but I won't be surprised if that's found its way to that main library as well. It's also not just foreigners and families that have become refugees. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, 2 animals have been evacuated from a zoo in Ukraine and brought to safety in Romania. An adult male lion named Simba and a wolf named Aquila were taken from the country in what an animal rights group says was part of a 4-day mission, quote, full of dangers, unquote. Those dangers didn't only involve making their way past combatants and crossing the border, but also because the lion and wolf were fully awake during the entire journey due to the lack of tranquilizers in Ukraine. The animals will first quarantine in their new digs, and after being on display a while, they will be relocated to new sanctuaries. Well, one last story for you. This one is a bit shocking to say the least. Family members who believed they had buried their relative in 2017, only to later discover that he was in fact alive and the body was misidentified, are now suing the county. Frank Kerrigan, age 86, and his daughter Carol Makeley, age 60, are accusing the Orange County Coroner's Office of, quote, intentional and negligent misrepresentation, unquote, in identifying a body as Frankie Kerrigan in 2017 through fingerprints and state ID, leading them to believe the man had died. The case was first heard on March 21st. The Orange County Sheriff's Department, which oversees the coroner's office, declined to comment at the time. On May 6, 2017, Frank Kerrigan received a dreaded call for any parent, a call from the coroner's office informing him that his son Frankie had died. His body was found behind a Verizon store in Fountain Valley, California. Kerrigan family lawyer James D. Simone said, just 2 days prior, the Kerrigan family had attempted to get Frankie, who battled schizophrenia and was homeless, into supportive housing and medical care. Frank never went to identify the body as Frankie's because the coroner's office assured him it was not necessary due to the state ID and fingerprints. D. Simone added that the coroner's office never actually ID'd or matched the fingerprints to Frankie because they were not his. This was devastating for the Kerrigan family, the lawyer said. The family was just very devastated that their son and brother had died under such uncertain circumstances. After holding a funeral for Frankie and burying what they believed to be his body, Frankie showed up at the home of a family friend who was also one of the pallbearers at the funeral just 11 days later. The friend immediately called Frank, Frankie's father, to inform him that his son was alive. The body that was actually buried was that of a 54-year-old Army veteran from Kansas who was also homeless. The mix-up began when a Fountain Valley police officer said Dickens' body could be Kerrigan's at the scene, and the coroner later, quote, confirmed, unquote, it after looking at Kerrigan's 11-year-old DMV photo, according to D. Simone. Damone said, quote, while it's true that they were overjoyed when Frankie showed up alive 11 days later, they really are still harmed by what they feel was a lack of honesty, a betrayal of the Orange County Coroner's Office duties to them, and still have feelings of sadness and anxiety about this whole event, unquote. Jury selection for the case is set to begin March 23rd. While details are not yet fully known, the family is still seeking full and fair compensation for the harm suffered from the ordeal. That is a lot of emotions right there for those individuals to have to deal with and go through. And so I can definitely understand just the trauma that they may feel with that. And it's also kind of shocking, too, that you wouldn't do your homework on something like that, because that is a big mix-up and something to really mistake. And they don't really talk about the individual who actually died, about his family, but that would also be a shock for them if they had no whereabouts of a loved one for 5 years and then all of a sudden get a call that he was buried under somebody else's name and was no longer living. Well, a couple of final notes for you as we wrap things up for the Matthew Rocky Show for this week. First of all, they say in every friend group there is one who is unnecessarily violent. I beat up the guy I suspected most because he could do any harm. That's terrible. As a security guard, my boss told me my job was to watch The Office. So far, I'm on season 6, and I'm really not sure what this has to do with security. But here's another thing you might not know. The government recently announced they're phasing out Roman numerals. Not on my watch. Did you ever hear the joke about experiencing deja vu? Well, here's another thing. What's the number one rule of spice trade? Time is money. And here are 10 things that have milk in them. Cheese, butter, yogurt, and 7 cows. Oh my goodness, that is bad. These just are going to continue to get worse, so we should quit while we're ahead. But hey, it does remind me. So my brother-in-law is a dairy farmer, and I grew up helping him out on his farm a number of different times growing up, and I can think of all kinds of cow jokes at the moment. Like, what do you get when you cross a cow with an earthquake? A milkshake, or what do you call a cow after it gives birth? Decaffeinated. The list goes on. Well, next week it's going to be a very special episode of the Matthew Rocky Show. I will be live in studio with multiple guests. Super excited about that, so stay tuned for the Matthew Rocky Show for next week. Until then, have a wonderful weekend, a great week, and we'll see you next time right here on the Matthew Rocky Show.